All right, picture this. It's 2026, and the global geopolitical landscape feels like an absolute powder keg. We're talking full-scale sanction wars, dealing with crises from a captured Venezuelan president to territorial disputes over Greenland, and now the United States is openly contemplating regime change in Iran. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to unpack the incredibly rocky 73-year relationship between the United States and Iran. It's a massive, complex history, but we're going to structure it into an explainer we can all easily digest.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you look at the modern world, it begs a really massive question. Why has the US spent over 45 years heavily sanctioning Iran, threatening them, and basically treating them like the ultimate arch nemesis? You know, it's incredibly easy to just assume this is all about religion, or terrorism, or a race for nuclear weapons. But if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, you realize America maintains highly functional, sometimes even strong relationships with them. So no, the hostility between Washington and Tehran goes way, way deeper than that. This is a multi-generational grudge. And to understand how it started, we have to rewind the clock.
Section 1. The root of the grudge. To truly grasp this conflict, we need to flash back to 1950s Tehran. Picture a modern progressive democracy sitting right on top of vast reserves of oil.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of that early conflict. At the time, Great Britain was fully leveraging Iranian oil. Honestly, the Royal Navy practically ran on the stuff. Since 1914, the British government owned 51% of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. To put this into perspective, between 1914 and 1950, that company paid a staggering £90.8 million in corporate taxes directly to Britain. Meanwhile, the Iranian government, they received just £35.2 million in royalties and taxes. Iran wasn't even getting a fraction of the taxes Britain collected, let alone the total revenue. Following World War II, a massive wave of nationalism swept the developing world. Colonized nations wanted their independence, and they wanted their economies back. For Iranians, the absolute primary focus was reclaiming their oil from the British.
Well, the breaking point finally came in 1950. An American-owned oil company actually agreed to a 50-50 profit split with Saudi Arabia. So naturally, Iran wanted the exact same deal. But the British Foreign Office flat-out rejected it. Enter Mohammad Mossadegh. He was a 69-year-old, Western-educated, fiercely nationalist lawyer and politician. With immense public support, he was democratically elected as Prime Minister of Iran in 1951. Mossadegh firmly believed Iran should control its own natural resources. So when Britain absolutely refused his proposed 50-50 compromise, Mossadegh took decisive action. He fully nationalized Iran's oil industry.
Section 2. Coup and the dictator. Britain completely panicked at the loss of their oil. After failing to crush Iran's economy with naval blockades, they turned to the United States, convincing President Eisenhower that Mossadegh was a communist threat.
The result of that? Operation Ajax. It was a 1953 CIA covert mission that honestly reads like a mini heist movie. Step 1. CIA officers arrive in Tehran with literal suitcases stuffed with cash. Step 2. They bribe local newspaper editors to print massive amounts of anti-Mossadegh propaganda. Step 3. They recruit street thugs to create chaos, and even hired operatives to pretend to be communists, threatening religious leaders just to make it look like Mossadegh was cracking down on Islam. Step 4. Overthrow the government. On August 19, 1953, street violence erupted. Tanks rolled in, and tragically, around 300 people died. Mossadegh was ousted, arrested, and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. Just like that, the oil nationalization was completely reversed.
In Mossadegh's place, the US and Britain installed a pro-Western monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. Now, for the United States, this was a massive geopolitical victory. They secured a vital Middle East ally, and American oil companies got to step in and take about 50% of the oil revenue. But for ordinary Iranians, the reality was incredibly dark. Over the next 25 years, the Shah lived in absurd, pro-Western luxury while ruling with extreme brutality. He utilized a terrifying secret police force called SAVAK, who, get this, were actually trained by the CIA. They imprisoned, tortured, and executed thousands of political opponents. So underneath the surface, immense resentment was building among the Iranian masses.
Section 3. Revolution and Retaliation. By 1979, decades of that pent-up resentment finally boiled over. Millions took to the streets, forcing the Shah to flee and transforming Iran into an anti-Western theocracy almost overnight.
A rapid domino effect of retaliations immediately followed.
See, when the exiled Shah traveled to the U.S. for medical treatment, Iranians were utterly terrified. They genuinely believed the U.S. was plotting another 1953-style coup. So, Iranian students took matters into their own hands. They stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. To them, it wasn't just a diplomatic mission. They viewed it as a literal CIA command post for regime change.
444. That is the number of days 52 Americans were held hostage inside that embassy. Just let that sink in for a second. This event was broadcast into American living rooms every single night. It thoroughly humiliated the United States globally, it completely destroyed Jimmy Carter's presidency, and it permanently severed diplomatic relations. The hostages were finally released in January 1981, literally minutes after Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. But from this moment on, the relationship wasn't just strained, it was a state of permanent hostility.
And you better believe the United States wanted revenge. In 1980, neighboring Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran, kicking off a brutal 8-year war. The U.S. saw a perfect opportunity to weaken its new nemesis. While the U.S. didn't start the war, they heavily supported Saddam Hussein. They provided Iraq with satellite intelligence, combat helicopters, and dual-use weapon technology. Most shockingly, the U.S. turned a complete blind eye when Iraq used chemical weapons against Iranians, even lobbying the UN not to condemn Iraq. To Iran, the message was crystal clear. America's foreign policy wasn't about human rights, it was purely about regional dominance.
Section 4. The Nuclear Escalation. Fast forward to the modern era, where Iran's growing nuclear program absolutely terrified the U.S. and threatened the Middle East's delicate balance of power.
The global stakes of a nuclear Iran are just staggering. Think about it. If Iran acquired a nuclear weapon, it would fundamentally neutralize the U.S. military presence in the region. It would provide an unbreakable shield for militias allied with Iran, like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and directly threaten Israel. Furthermore, it could force nations like Saudi Arabia and Turkey to scramble and start their own nuclear programs. But the economic threat is just as severe. A full 21% of the entire world's petroleum passes through the Strait of Hormuz, right on Iran's doorstep. The U.S. felt it could not allow a hostile nuclear-armed state to potentially control that critical choke point.
So the U.S. spent years trying to cripple Iran with sanctions to stop the nuclear program. Finally, a brief window of de-escalation actually arrived in 2015. The Obama administration brokered the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Iran agreed to dismantle much of its nuclear infrastructure and submit to super-intense international inspections in exchange for sanctions relief. For a moment, the economy stabilized, but then the political winds shifted. In 2018, the Trump administration officially withdrew the U.S. from the deal. Their goal was to exert maximum pressure to force Iran into a much stricter agreement that would also limit their ballistic missiles and regional activities.
The sheer scale of this maximum pressure campaign was immense. The U.S. added over 1,500 new sanctions targeting the Iranian economy, and the results were devastating. Iran's currency totally collapsed, losing 2/3 of its value, and oil exports plummeted. Predictably, Iran retaliated. They began completely ignoring the restrictions of the old nuclear deal, enriching uranium to much higher levels and moving dangerously close to the breakout capacity for a weapon. This rapid escalation brings us directly to the crisis of 2026, with the U.S. enacting zero oil export directives and openly discussing military strikes.
Section 5. Two competing perspectives. To truly understand this dangerous standoff, we absolutely must look at the distinct psychological viewpoints of both nations.
So, the crucial point is this. From Washington's perspective, they're trying to contain a deeply problematic, theocratic regime that took Americans hostage, chants death to America, funds regional militias that destabilize the Middle East, and is actively racing toward a nuclear weapon. They believe Iran simply cannot be trusted and must be stopped before it's too late. But flip the coin. From Tehran's perspective, they are defending their sovereignty against an imperialist superpower that overthrew their beloved democracy in 1953, propped up a brutal dictator for 25 years, helped Saddam Hussein gas their citizens, and has spent literal decades trying to destroy their economy. Every single American sanction or threat just confirms to Iran that the U.S. will never allow them to be independent.
And while these two governments remain locked in this bitter, multi-generational struggle, we really cannot forget the human cost. Caught perfectly in the middle of this geopolitical tug-of-war are millions of ordinary Iranian citizens. These are people who simply desire normal lives, economic opportunity, and the right to choose their own destiny. Right now, in 2026, they are being crushed simultaneously by two massive forces: the brutal crackdowns of their own regime in the streets, and the unbearable, suffocating weight of American sanctions on their daily lives.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. We've traced the Persian pendulum from the oil disputes of the 1950s right through the CIA coup, the revolution, the hostage crisis, the wars, and these modern nuclear standoffs. It is a constant, exhausting cycle of action and extreme retaliation. And it forces us to ask, until one side is willing to truly break this historical cycle, absorb a huge political hit, and stop the swinging pendulum of retaliation, will the US and Iran forever be stuck in this exact same loop? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.